Since there's no UFC for the next 2 weeks, I thought I'd take the time to look back on the year of fighting we've had so far and reflect on the violence that we've all voluntarily tuned in for. This year there were quite a few title changes and a lot of new talented fighters starting to make names for themselves, so let's take a look back and reflect. So in January the UFC were back in Brazil, obviously featuring a lot of Brazilian fighters. It was where Glover Teixeira retired, Jamal Hill beat him by decision, and it was also where Brandon Moreno defeated Davison Figueiredo for their fourth fight. We also had Johnny Walker knocking out Paul Craig, which would probably be my fun fight for if you're going to go watch this pay-per-view again. And we also had the debut of both the Bonfim brothers. It seems that Gabriel is kind of the better one, but at the same time, he did just lose to Nicholas Dolby, who actually also fought on this card, but he won by decision. I think I speak for everyone when I say that I'm glad that this whole quadrilogy between Davison and Brandon Moreno is over. Davison is a bit of a weird one because he either looks like a Terminator or he looks a bit like a fish out of water, and he definitely looked like the latter in this fight with Brandon. Moreno went on to lose his belt later in the year, and Davison has got a fight lined up for the next pay-per-view, I believe, but apart from that, he sort of had this thing where he's gone up to bantamweight and then he took a fight at flyweight, and then now he's going back up to bantamweight, so it's a bit of a weird situation with him. For the main event, obviously Glover retired after. He retired in an empty crowd because it was in Brazil, and I think the Brazilian crowd were upset that Jamal Hill won. So then Jamal Hill became champion, but then tore his Achilles or something, vacated the belt, and now we've got Alex Pereira as champion. It seems like the fight that the UFC is going to go for is Alex versus Jamal. So it's kind of Alex getting revenge for Glover part 2 because he just beat Yuri, who also recently beat Glover. But the pay-per-view itself was pretty good. Jamal Hill really did look good. I think there's definitely a big recency bias, and I think that's going to be a theme that continues to this video. But he did look really good against Glover. The Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno was a weird fight. It was a doctor stoppage, and it had some cool moments, but it wasn't the best. Gilbert Burns just sort of blew through Neil Magny, but overall it was a pretty good pay-per-view. There were a lot of finishes. Johnny Walker had his own finish, of course. Robocop got knocked out, which I was very upset about. But yeah, it was decent. February's pay-per-view was Makhachev versus Volkanovski 1. Had some other good fights. The co-main event was Yair versus Josh Emmett, where Yair tore Josh apart with body kicks and then ended up triangling him. Jack Della Maddalena defeated Randy Brown, dropped him and then choked him out. I think this was in Australia, so there's a lot of Australian guys, but in terms of name value, there's not that much, but I think the nature of this pay-per-view, it was very, very top-heavy. People are still talking about the first Volkanovski-Makhachev fight even now because it was entertaining, and it was also just a great display of technique, talent, and it's definitely one to go look by. I think even the people who thought Volkanovski was going to win, I think even they were surprised by how well he was defending the wrestling. And then I also think that people were a little bit surprised by how good Islam's striking is. And then of course later in the year they had a rematch. Islam KO'd Volkanovski, and with that it kind of stopped all the talks about how Volkanovski won the first fight. Of course, as a Volkanovski fan, I'm going to be a little bit biased, but I think it was round 2 which was the controversial one, because if I remember correctly, Volkanovski was kind of landing strikes and then Islam took him down, basically just sat on his back, but he didn't punch him or really try and choke him out or anything. I think that was kind of the main point of controversy, because it's like, if you have someone's back and don't do anything, how are you winning? But at the same time, it's difficult. Co-main event, you had Yair Rodriguez versus Josh Emmett. I remember when I watched it live, I thought that Yair was just absolutely smoking Josh Emmett, and he was mostly. But when I watched this fight back when Volkanovski fought Rodriguez to kind of refresh myself, and then I did notice that Rodriguez was getting hit a lot by Josh Emmett, and then because I originally was sort of leaning towards Rodriguez winning against Volkanovski, but then when I came and watched this fight again, I was like, wow, he's getting punched a lot. And of course, Volkanovski, much more offensively technical than Emmett, and would definitely find the same holes that Emmett is finding. It was for an interim title as well, which was pointless because Yair and Volkanovski fought 6 months later, so they could have just not had it as an interim title fight. I don't think anyone was looking at Rodriguez like he was the rightful champion or anything like that. And Volkanovski, well, they fought on the same fight night, then they obviously fought each other, so they had the same time off. So then March was a kind of a big pay-per-view because Jon Jones was returning after 3 years, and I made my first ever YouTube video about it, and I was actually really happy because I was nervous about making my first YouTube video because what if I was said that Jon Jones was going to do this, and this, and then he gets smoked by Ciryl Gane? I was worried about that, but like, to my fortune, he almost did exactly what I said he was going to do. I said in my video that like basically his experience at light heavyweight with a bunch of really fast guys, a bunch of explosive guys, it's going to help him in heavyweight where everyone's slower, especially as a wrestler who times shots, times, ducking under punches, which is, what he did. And then, Ciryl Gane sort of got embarrassed. He did return later in the year when the UFC went to Paris and came back and won, but he was really, let's just say he was the target of some criticism after the fight. There were a couple of names on this card. Shevchenko finally lost to Alexa Grasso. She did one of her spinning kicks and then got caught and choked out and got turned into one of those sweets, which is like white and red. But yeah, I mean, after the Tyler Santos fight, it was a bit like, oh, she's not as good as everyone thinks she is. And then Grasso really sort of exposed her silly technique, shall we say. Probably the banger fight of the pay-per-view was Shavkat versus Jeff Neal. They were sort of meant to fight before, and then I think someone got injured or something, but yeah, they went back and forth. Jeff Neal was kind of the welcome to the big guys fight for Shavkat. Definitely took it to Shavkat. Maybe expose some of the punching defense that Shavkat has. At the time, people were sort of comparing us a little bit to Khamzat versus Gilbert Burns. The fight sort of had a similar trajectory where they both really sort of took lumps out of each other, and then Shavkat wins in the third round. Quite close to the end of the fight, it was like 4th minute. Basically puts Jeff Neal in a rear naked choke standing up and puts him to sleep. On this card we had the UFC debut of Bo Nickel, who it was like his like 4th fight or something. He chokes out someone. It was a bit weird because he did he was in the clinch and then kneed the guy in the balls and then took him down basically off of that, and then he puts him in a head and arm choke and he can't finish it. I think like he's obviously a brilliant wrestler. Some of the jiu-jitsu a little bit lacking maybe, but he won, but he also did a lot of things wrong. He did fight later in the year and basically just blew some guy out of the water. So it's going to be interesting to see where Bo Nickel goes. He obviously hasn't been challenged yet. He hasn't had a fight that's like gone past a couple minutes yet. So I definitely would like to see that happen. And yeah, we had Cody Garbrandt come back and have a unanimous decision win over Trevin Jones, whoever that is. To be honest, you got to feel bad for Cody just getting his brain splattered in every single fight. It was good to see him win. When I was watching the fight, he was doing his like little sort of breakdancing moves, like showboating, and I was like, if he gets knocked out, it's just gonna look so bad. But he didn't get knocked out, so good for him. And then the other notable fight, I would say, we had Dricus du Plessis, TKOing Derek Brunson. It was a weird fight. Derek he took him down and basically just controlled him for the first round, like all of it, and then he just gassed out of nowhere. It was strange, and Dricus was just punching him and punching him and punching him, and then yeah, KO'd him. It was Derek Brunson's last fight in the UFC. He's recently just signed with PFL, I think, but definitely a strange fighter. Obviously very talented. He came pretty close to winning a title. He beat Darren Till, which was pretty funny, but definitely a strange fighter, I'd say. We had another pay-per-view in March in London, and I was actually there for this one, and it was pretty cool. I bought a hat, and I wore it the other week. But it was Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 3. Co-main event was Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev. But unfortunately, they were sort of the only main fights on the card. It was definitely quite a top-heavy card. They put a lot of sort of UK, European fighters, but a lot of them weren't crazy well known, I guess you could say. Muhammad Mokaev was on the prelims. It was the fight where the guy put him in a knee bar and literally bent his knee back. It was gross. I was there, and it was gross in real life. But yeah, it wasn't. I definitely don't think it was the most action-packed pay-per-view ever. I think a lot of people agree on that. Co-main event was Justin Gaethje beating Rafael Fiziev, which a lot of people didn't think he was going to do. I think the loss to Charles definitely cast a negative light on him. What I thought at the time is he just lost his second title fight. I thought it was going to kind of be the winding down of Justin's career, but the opposite is proven. He beat Rafael Fiziev, which a lot of people think really positively of. I definitely do as well. I think he's awesome. But Justin fought really smart. He wrestled a little bit. He had all of the counters to Fiziev's kicks, which completely surprised me and a lot of other people. He had this really nice when Fiziev threw his switch kick, which would have been his left kick, into Gaethje's open side. He would almost go like he would kind of step out so that he was almost like in a straight line. Think about how like thin Nate Diaz stance is, sort of like that, and throw a hook. It was really impressive, and yeah, it was also a pretty good fight. Main event you had Usman versus Edwards 3. It was a strange-ish fight. It was a lot of people kind of think that it was what Edwards versus Usman 2 would have been if it wasn't an elevation and Leon Edwards didn't gas out. Me being in the crowd, I was sort of going nuts throughout the whole thing, so I don't remember it that well. I watched the fight highlights recently, and I thought Leon Edwards looks like really good, better than he's ever done before. Obviously, Usman's career is winding down. Edwards, he just seemed like he just had an answer to everything Usman was doing. He countered all the punches. He got up when he was taken down. He just wouldn't let Usman do anything. He threw like a really nice knee. I think it was in the first round. But yeah, he looked really good, and he's fighting at the end of the year, which pretty excited about as English. Remember, he got a point taken away, which made the scorecard a little bit closer. I remember some people thinking Usman won. I didn't think he won. I know I'm biased, but I didn't. My girlfriend recorded a video of the result being read, and then panned over to me screaming like an idiot because Leon Edwards won. So that ends March. We go over to April. One of my first traumatic cards of the year. We had Alex Pereira getting knocked out by Israel Adesanya. We also had Gilbert Burns beating Jorge Masvidal and then Jorge Masvidal retiring. We had Rob Font KOing Adrian Yanez. That was a crazy fight. We had Kevin Holland kind of having a Kevin Holland performance against Santiago Ponzinibbio. And we had Raul Rosas Jr. losing for the first time in his career to Christian Rodriguez, whoever that is. There's not too much to say about this pay-per-view. The fights definitely sort of speak for themselves. I remember being really high on Adrian Yanez, but he lost. He got KO'd by Rob Font, and then he just got TKO'd like a couple weeks ago by leg kicks. So yeah, maybe he's not as good as I thought he was. I was actually going to do a video about him, but I put it on pause after he lost, and then when he lost again, that video has been well and truly scrapped. Jorge Masvidal showed up kind of fat against Gilbert Burns. It wasn't the best fight ever. It was just Gilbert Burns sort of just doing Gilbert Burns things, landing a couple punches, taking down wrestling. I remember they showed like a replay. If you remember Usman knocking out Jorge Masvidal, like the slow-mo video of that. There's like a shot in this fight of Gilbert Burns doing the same punch, but it like dinks Jorge's chin. It's kind of funny. But of course, I think definitely the highlight of this pay-per-view is Israel Adesanya finally beating Alex Pereira. I was very upset because I like Alex a lot. Pretty funny though, because they both have pretty solid fan bases, and the Alex fans were all like, 3-1, 3-1, and then the Izzy fans were just ecstatic. So yeah, it was, upsetting for the Alex fans, but it must have felt good if you're Israel Adesanya and if you're one of his fans. If you're on the social medias, you'll probably know about these guys' rivalry. It's gone from a violent rivalry, a fighting rivalry, almost to just a petty one at this point, because after Izzy knocked him out, he did the whole bow and arrow thing, which is obviously Alex's thing, and then Alex became double champ when Izzy couldn't, and there's a whole lot of stuff to it. I'm not going to go through the whole thing now, but you probably know some of it if you're an MMA fan. But yeah, not too much to talk about that pay-per-view. Obviously, it makes logical sense for the UFC to kind of when they have the big stars fighting, not to stack the pay-per-view, because the big stars bring all of the fans. You don't really need to put other big fighters on it, so it makes sense that it was a little bit top heavy. Next up in UFC 288, we've got Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo, who was coming back after like 3 years off. Belal Muhammad beat Gilbert Burns in a 5-round fight that did not need to be a 5-round fight. My God, I didn't watch it. I saved myself. But yeah, beat Gilbert Burns by decision. This definitely was not one of the best pay-per-views of the year. It has a lot of who are they? Oh, I think I've seen them once. Type fighters. Jessica Andrade got KO'd. Marcel Everywhere fought short notice Diego Lopez. That's definitely like the banger fight of the card. That was for a decision. It was good. Oh, Drew Dober got knocked out for the first time in his career against Matt Frivola. Does not do well for the sort of the habit that Drew Dober has, where he only wins against black people. It is strange. Definitely not going to say anything else about that, but you got to admit it was weird. But he recently did beat a white guy, so that whole thing's over. Crone Gracie came back after like a 3-year layoff. Not Crone Gacy. Goh, imagine. Anyways, Crone Gracie came back after a year off. Lost. That was embarrassing. Just sat on his ass for 15 minutes. Marcel Everweb, I don't remember who he was supposed to fight, but he fought Diego Lopez on short notice, and I gotta say, I'm loving Diego Lopez so far. He's fought, I think, twice since then, and both banger fights. The dude's pretty cool, and he's got awful hair, awful tattoos, but apart from that, he's pretty cool. The whole Gilbert Burns versus Belal Muhammad thing was weird. It was 5 rounds. It was also short notice. It's not main event. It's not a title fight. Why was it 5 rounds? But Gilbert Burns injured his shoulder, and it was just that, really. Gilbert Burns couldn't be Gilbert Burns. Belal Muhammad was being Belal Muhammad. It's pretty funny hearing Belal like whine about not getting a title shot, and the UFC just don't care. But I'm all for it. And in the main event, Henry Cejudo came back after a long layoff. He lost a split decision to what's his name, Aljamain Sterling, which that Aljamain Sterling just seems to, all of his fights seem to be split decision apart from the Dillashaw one. Was not a good striking fight. Let's be honest. It had some cool grappling moments, but it did sort of spark the whole should knees be allowed, because Aljamain, he would shoot for a takedown and then he would just sort of sit on his hands and knees in front of Cejudo, and Cejudo couldn't knee him. But Cejudo could have done other things, mainly go for chokes. Seems like that's not really part of his skill set, which is fair enough. And then, yeah, not the best pay-per-view. It had some cool moments, but I wasn't fine-tuned when I was watching this. UFC 289 was in Canada. It was Amanda Nunes' retirement fight against Irene Aldana, to what's her name's dismay. But really, it was a Charles Dubronx show, because he came by and he just stole the Canadian crowd. Bear in mind, he probably speaks about 5 words of English. Just goes to show how much people love Charles, how much people love entertaining fights, how much people love a guy who just goes for it. Those hands are international. In terms of the main event, Amanda beat Irene Aldana just like across the board, completely shut her out, and then retired, which upset Juliana Pena. What a shame. Yeah, obviously an amazing career, widely considered the women's GOAT. And definitely for good reason, especially after Valentina Shevchenko's embarrassing 2023 and a bit of 2022 as well. This pay-per-view also wasn't the most stacked. I honestly don't recognize a lot of the names that were on it, but the one fight I definitely would recommend is Nate the Train Landwehr fought Dan Ige, and yeah, it was a banger fight. It was Dan Ige won a decision. He sort of beat up Nate Landwehr, I'm not gonna lie. He kind of exposed, in my opinion, he sort of exposed Nate's lack of the clinch, where Dan Ige would basically put his head into Nate's chest, and because Nate was longer, he couldn't hit him. But Dan Ige was actually kind of taking advantage of the fact that he was smaller. He was pushing his head into Nate's chest and then throwing hooks over the top. But yeah, it was good. It was a good fight, definitely. I think Nate, and it took until like the 3rd round to realize to just grab Dan's head, but by then it was too late. Dan had built up a lot of like accumulative damage, but Nate's young. It's normal to have holes, I guess. But yeah, it was interesting seeing someone take advantage of the of the fact that they are smaller. You don't see it too often, and you definitely don't see it too often when it comes to striking. Next up, we've got Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez, the interim champion, for no reason. Um, yeah, it was sort of just the Alex Volkanovski special, really. I sort of mentioned it earlier, but I was very sort of back and forth on this fight because Volkanovski is a little susceptible to kicks. We definitely saw that in his last fight. But the thing that tided me over to Team Volkanovski in this fight was watching the Yair versus Josh Emmett, like I said, and watching how much Josh Emmett landed on Yair. Volkanovski, obviously, amazing striker, amazing. For a little guy, he gets on the inside so well. I saw a video of him sparring with Adesanya, and even against 6'4" Adesanya, he just finds ways to get inside, finds ways to land his own punches. It's crazy to watch, but that did that. Did some wrestling, which he's not as well known for, but he definitely has it. He used it a lot, sort of, in his early UFC career, but he sort of just shut down Yair and then TKO'd him in like the fourth round. Co-main event, we had Pantoja beating Brandon Moreno by split decision. Obviously, they fought twice before, once in Ultimate Fighter, once in UFC. Pantoja's won every single time, and he won this time. I think it was like 2-2 going into the fifth, where Brandon was definitely slicker striking. Pantoja's striking is messy, but then his ground game is beautiful and slick. For the fifth round, he got onto Moreno's back and just didn't get off, and that was it. You could say that Brandon Moreno deserves a rematch because he's been champion before. It was a close fight. Honestly, I'm kind of glad he's not getting a rematch because if he won, then there'd probably be a trilogy, and then it's just going to be Brandon versus Davison Part 2, where they have like 5 fights and just hold up the division for years. You may also remember after he wins, Pantoja calls out his deadbeat dad, which is emotional for some, funny for others. I can see both sides. We had Dricus Du Plessis KOing Robert Whittaker, which was crazy. I like pretty much everybody. Completely counted out Dricus. He's got kind of an ugly fighting style, I guess. But what the turning point for me was in the first round, he takes Robert down, and Robert is like he's known as one of the best anti-wrestlers in the UFC for good reason. But he didn't get up, and I was like, uh-oh, something bad's going on. And Dricus lands, I think it was a southpaw jab. He lands like 3 of those and completely snaps back Rob Whittaker's head. And then I think on the last one drops him and just the guy is built like a fridge, and when a fridge is on top of you, it's probably hard to get off. And TKO's Whittaker, it was a big deal. Then you had Adesanya come in, and they had a bit of a back and forth. They've got a weird thing going on with Africa. I don't really want to get into it. I have 23 subscribers. I don't want to say something now that I might regret later. There were a couple other fights. Jalen Turner fought Dan Hooker. Bo Nickel was back. Like I said, he beat some guy. I think the dude was making his UFC debut or something. Bo Nickel, he feinted like 3 takedowns, and the guy just didn't react. So what he did, he feinted a takedown, and then he did almost like a gazelle hook. There's a video of Gervonta Davis doing it where you're a southpaw and you kind of leap forward, throwing your right hand, but it just clips the guy and then just flattens him in like a minute. Similar as before, very impressive. But still want to see him. I still want to see him fight for more than a couple minutes. And I think this was like June or July or something, but he hasn't fought since. So I'm hoping he has another fight announced soon. The last main noteworthy thing I'd say was Robbie Lawler had his retirement fight, fought Nico Price, and just smoked him in about 40 seconds. It's definitely sad and a little uncomfortable when you see these old guys just getting mauled by young talent, but Robbie Lawler basically just grabbed the guy and just punched him and punched him and punched him until he fell over. It was a very Robbie Lawler performance, and it was good to see one of the true good guys of the sport going out off of a win. They played like a goodbye video, and it made him cry in the octagon. But yeah, it was there isn't really a better way you can retire. Just grab a guy, punch him until he falls over, leave. Definitely a future Hall of Famer, and like I said, definitely one of the good guys of the sport. For such a violent fighting style, the guy was so soft spoken, apart from that one time, but so soft spoken, so respectful, and I'm glad he retired on a win. Up next, we have one of the most traumatic events of my life. We've got Dustin Poirier getting knocked out by Justin Gaethje, and yeah, I am still in therapy because of it. Being from England, I usually watch the fights the next morning instead of getting up in the middle of the night. But of course, because Dustin's my favorite fighter, I watched him live, and yeah, I was very you know, if you've ever watched your favorite fighter get knocked out, you'll know it's just sucks. But biases aside, it was tuning up to be a good fight. One of those crazy fast paced first rounds where they both land good stuff, and then out of nowhere, Justin Gaethje throws a head kick, and just that was it. He wins the BMF belt. Yay! As a Dustin Poirier fan, it's a little bit difficult because realistically, his chances at a title are just disappearing. But I guess there's still hope. He's always going to be my favorite fighter, but sometimes you got to be honest. But also on this card, Kevin Holland had another Kevin Holland performance. He dust Michael Chiesa. I saw somewhere that Michael Chiesa has this weird thing where he gets dast all the time. But yeah, Kevin Holland, he's a funny because he's obviously quite skinny, but he's got great power, and that's got to be annoying for the guys that fight him. He doesn't look overly powerful, and he doesn't swing that much, but he seems to hurt everyone he fights. It's unusual, but good for him, I guess. We also had Tony Ferguson losing for like the 100th time. This time against Bobby Green, who was unranked, I think. I really thought they were going to cut Tony Ferguson off this, but Tony Ferguson in a couple weeks is fighting Paddy Pimblett, which is, yeah, if you went to like 2019 and said Tony Ferguson's going to fight this guy, you'd be like, you know, definitely a big downfall for Tony. I wish they sort of just cut him instead of feeding him to these new guys, but yeah, whatever. Derek Lewis flying needs some guy, and then also Alex Pereira split decision beat Jan Blachowicz in his first fight at light heavyweight. Of course, if you're in on the whole Adesanya Alex beef rivalry, you know that Alex has beaten everyone that has a win over Adesanya. It was at altitude, so they both gassed out. Bit of a weird fight. I remember Jan wrestled him for the first round and then gassed out, and then Alex just sort of picked at him for the rest of the fight. Up next, we've got Aljamain Sterling losing his title, getting TKO'd by Sean O'Malley. We've got Weili Zhang just beating someone up, and then a couple other fights. The Sean O'Malley KO sort of went viral. It's one of the only ones that the UFC has posted like the full finish, but yeah, not a lot of people saw him winning a title at all, really. Definitely not as soon as he did. A little bit unfortunate for Sterling. Fun fact, he was actually, apart from Volkanovski, the longest reigning current champion. He sort of deserved a rematch, but it makes sense why they're not doing it. Speaking of that, Chito Vera was on the card. He beat Pedro Munoz by like jabbing him basically. And is now getting the next title shot, which is obviously makes sense from a financial point. Doesn't make sense considering Sandhagen beat him like a couple months ago. I kind of fell into the trap thinking that Chito Vera was good. Well, he is good, but he's definitely not. I don't think he's title good. I don't think he's good enough to be a champion. I do think Sean's going to beat him. They're fighting in January now. But I guess we'll talk about that later. What else on the card? Ian Gary had that weird fight with Neil Magny. Ian Gary just leg kicked him for 3 rounds, but it was weird because Neil Magny sort of spoke about like whooping his kid or whatever, and then Ian Gary had like a mental breakdown. It was weird. Like he wouldn't let him talk during the press conference, flipping him off a load of times. It was just weird, uncomfortable. He definitely doesn't have. Ian Gary is not the most popular guy in UFC. Definitely not the most popular Irishman. Chris Weidman came back after that gross leg break. He lost to Brad Tavares by decision. He did not look good. He always says that he's coming back for the title. You shouldn't believe him. If you believed in this time, you're silly. Brad Tavares basically just leg kicked in the whole fight, but people were getting mad. But then He was kicking the leg that didn't break, so it was, and it's also leg kicks are allowed. It was weird. My go back and watch this fight was RoboCop fighting just some guy. He got knocked out earlier in the year, heartbreaking, but he took this guy down. He mounted this guy. This guy turned his back, and RoboCop just slams him with elbows. It was nasty, but yeah, you should go watch it if you're a UFC fan and you like violence. Definitely a violent fight. It was short, but it was pretty cool. Up next, we've got 100% the biggest upset of the year. We've got Sean Strickland beating Israel Adesanya like 4 rounds to 1, dropping him in the first round. And just, yeah, crazy. I think I spent 22 out of 25 minutes of this fight with my jaw on the floor. Definitely seemed like something was up with Adesanya. I remember when at the end of the fight where Strickland is just looking at him, he has his hands down by his side, right? And Adesanya kicks him in the body, and it was like, the guy has got his hands by his hips. The one time the guy has his hands like by his body, you kick him in the body. You're being silly. But yeah, it doesn't look like we're going to see Adesanya again for a while. I don't know why. He tends to keep his private life private. Fair enough. I would too. But yeah, it was a crazy fight because who the hell thought Sean Strickland was going to be champion, and who the hell thought Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis are fighting for the middleweight belt? Weird, but that happened. As I mentioned before, when they've got like big fighters on the main event, they obviously don't stack the rest of the card because it doesn't make sense. So the co-main event was Alexander Volkov just beating up Tai Tuivasa. Tai doesn't have very good defense, and recently his chin seems to have gone as well, so this just wasn't a good fight for him. Volkov just picked him apart and then did one of those chokes that the Russian guy does. It's Ezekiel choke. He Ezekiel choked him. So yeah, that just shows Tai Tuivasa is not the most skilled guy. We had Manel Kape fighting Felipe dos Santos. Manel Kape was supposed to fight Kai Kara-France. Kai Kara-France pulled out, but then Kai Kara-France was in the crowd at the press conference, and then they sort of had a back and forth, and then Adesanya like basically got involved. But it was a good fight and it was a bad fight. It was a good fight because there was action. There wasn't a lot of power, and it was sort of bad for Manel Kape because he's supposed to be one of the best flyweights in the world, but he was having like a back and forth fight with a guy who was making his UFC debut, so it wasn't great. A couple other fighters you sort of the fighters that you do recognize, but not great fighters. Carlos Ulberg, he just he fights whenever Adesanya fights. He fights someone that you've never heard of, and then he wins. So yeah. Jamie Malarkey fought. Blood Diamond lost again. He loses a lot. Yeah, that's sort of all you can say about the pay-per-view, really. It was definitely the main event which got all the attention, and for a good cause, because truly one of the bigger upsets of the UFC, I think, ever. Over to Abu Dhabi for October's pay-per-view. They do seem to go to Abu Dhabi for October a lot. I remember they did that with Khabib when he fought Poirier. Anyways, we've got the rematch with Islam Makhachev and Volkanovski. It was supposed to be Makhachev versus Charles 2. Charles pulled out. Volkanovski comes in on like a week's notice. Definitely a regrettable decision. Of course, you can say that with hindsight. This might just be me, but I thought that Volkanovski, like, he just looked different. Like, obviously, he wasn't in great shape. He was in great shape, but he wasn't in Volkanovski's shape, so he wasn't as like shredded as usual. But also, like, for whatever reason, I thought his face looked a bit different, but that might just be me. Co-main event, we've got Khamzat Chimaev coming back after like a year and a half off. He beats Kamaru Usman by a decision. I wasn't sure that Khamzat won. He won like it was definitely 1 round Usman, 1 round Khamzat, and then 1 round was like sort of in between. But yeah, he out wrestled Usman, which nobody does. Kamaru also took this fight on short notice. That might have been one of the reasons why Khamzat out wrestled him. If you watch Kamaru's fight with like Damian Maia, he's got like a training video of him and Michael Chandler from years ago. But the guy's got really good wrestling defense, basically. And then on the feet, it was basically just 1-2s and leg kicks. Wasn't really the most technical fight ever. At the end of the fight, they sort of had a bit of a scrap, but then it was like, they obviously don't know how to throw overhands. It was hard to watch. Neither of their striking looked overly impressive in this fight. Like I said it before, it was just 1-2s, and I'd say Kamaru's were a little bit more polished and efficient than Khamzat's, I think, but like I said, neither was great. You had a lot of Russian fighters, which makes sense. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like some of them were kind of given easy fights. Ikram Aliskerov fought a guy who was on like a 3-fight losing streak. Said Nurmagomedov fought someone. But you also had Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker, which was a pretty funny fight. It was weird because Magomed threw like an illegal knee, and then they stopped the fight, and they called it off, and then they both got upset. There was the whole thing where the doctor asked Johnny Walker where he was. Johnny Walker said in the desert. It was weird. Something that I think about illegal knees is that obviously Johnny Walker at the time looked okay. He looked like he could continue the fight. But if the fight went on and he got like flatlined a minute later, which in all likeness is a possibility, you gotta wonder like how much was that to do with the knee? If you go back to the Volkanovski and Rodriguez fight, about a minute before the fight finished, Volkanovski headbutts Rodriguez, and it's quite a nasty headbutt, sort of spins his jaw and everything. And then like 30 seconds later, he clips him and really hurts him. So you got to think like how much is it to do with Volkanovski punching him? It's obviously that's a factor, but Rodriguez has always had a pretty good chin. How much was the illegal headbutt contributing to the fact that he got TKO'd? I don't have the answer, but I think it's just something to think about. Muhammad Mokaev fought Tim Elliott. It was back and forward for a bit, and then Mokaev kind of took over. Sorry about that. You also had only other notable fight, I'd say Shara Bullet made his UFC debut. For like some like monster that everyone was talking about. I didn't think he looked that good. He obviously won, but obviously massive takedown defense issue. And I feel like if he fought someone who kind of took the fight to him a bit more, he'd really struggle. It was almost like watching him kick a bag, you know? I feel like if someone gets in your face, attempts takedowns, does it all, you're not going to be able to just stand in the middle of the cage and throw all your fancy kicks. Main event, we had Volkanovski getting knocked out I'd say pretty badly by Islam Makhachev. Islam Makhachev looked humongous, and then just straight away just started throwing loads of left kicks, and yeah, it was pretty quick fight, but that was almost all there was to it really. Volkanovski, he had his hand up, but it's kind of a well-known fact at this point that in MMA especially, one hand isn't enough to block a kick, especially when your hand is too low and the kick clips you on the top side of your head. But hearing him say, "Oh yeah, I saw the kick, I blocked it," it was just a little bit over. It's a little bit not good to hear because even if he blocked it with one hand, it probably would have hurt him, you know. And the same thing might have happened even if it hit him in the hand. Hand's not very big and protective. And then finally, last pay-per-view we're going to talk about because it's the most recent pay-per-view. Second to last pay-per-view of the year, we've got Alex Pereira versus Yuri Prochazka. We had Tom Aspinall versus Sergey Pavlovich. I'd say this is definitely one of the better pay-per-views of the year. We've got Joshua Van beating someone. I watched his fight earlier in the year. I thought he looked awesome. I thought he looked pretty powerful for a flyweight. We've got Diego Lopez. You know I love Diego Lopez. He KO'd Pat Sabatini. We had Matt Frivola versus Benoit Saint Denis. That was a good fight. It was very short, very good. It was funny because Matt Frivola was walking away and Benoit just kicks him in the face. So sometimes there's a lot of technique and there's a lot of nuances to fights, but sometimes you just got to kick him in the face. You know, it was solid KO. I'd say there's still not a lot of French talent in the UFC, but it's definitely growing. And Benoit Saint Denis, so far he looks really good. We had Jessica Andrade knocking out Mackenzie Dern. I'm not gonna lie, I sort of thought that Jessica Andrade had sort of had it. I didn't realise she was only 32. I thought she was quite a bit older, but yeah, she beat up Mackenzie Dern quite bad. Exposed her less than good striking, I guess you could say. You had Tom Aspinall knocking out Sergey Pavlovich, but before that, they had a little cuddle. And in the main event, we had Alex Pereira becoming light heavyweight champion, knocking out Yuri Prochazka, or knocking out. A lot of people think it was early. I do see that. I think it may have been a little bit early as well. the purpose of this video is just to kind of reflect on the year we had. So I guess I'm not going to go super duper into depth on these fights because they did just happen. But yeah, Alex had this sort of little speech where he called out Adesanya, saying about how he was in a bar. Adesanya said he was never gonna like become anything, and that motivated him and saved him. And he wanted to do the same thing for Adesanya. You know, it was sweet. They're rivalry, they're rivals, but they're also brothers, you could say. Little bit for like the thing about Aspinall and Pavlovich, it's the same thing. Nothing's changed. It's that their fights they all last like a minute, so it's difficult to really gauge how good they are. Aspinall, even before the fight, definitely looked like the more skilled fighter, but then there was the thing where is Sergey Pavlovich just gonna bonk him out of there, and he didn't. Tom Aspinall KO'd him. So yeah, Tom Aspinall's now got the interim heavyweight belt because the fight was originally John Jones. I'm kind of sad because I did wish John Jones was going to fight, but yeah, it was a good card. Some exciting finishes, a lot of exciting finishes actually, and that brings us up to Covington and Leon Edwards at the end of the year. So yeah, that's the video, I guess. It was just kind of to look back on the year we had, like I said. I didn't have a script for this video, so it might be a little bit all over the place. I apologize for that. My next video is going to be about Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. I've been watching a lot of their footage, and I do think I've found a couple things that will tell maybe where the fight is going to go and what's going to happen in the fight. But that'll be out, I get probably the week of the fight, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. And thank you for looking at this year with me. It's been an eventful year. Like I said before, a lot of title changes, a lot of people getting knocked out. It was a pretty good year, I think, so far. And yeah, so if you're going to watch the next video, I'll see you in the next video. And thank you for watching.